Welcome to Inspire Campfire, a podcast where ordinary people tell their stories of extraordinary adventure. These are campfire stories meant to inspire the rest of us to light the fire within, get outside, follow our dreams, and return to tell our own stories. Ready? Let's strike the match.
Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Scott Wurzbacher, and today we're going to explore how the call to adventure is often sparked by an inciting incident. Our guest is Mary Leavines from Franklin, North Carolina, where she is the owner of a hostel for thru-hikers along the Appalachian Trail. It was an inciting incident of her own that led her to the Appalachian Trail, which she thru-hiked in 2022. A storyteller, writer, and photographer herself, Mary's time on the trail allowed her to rewrite her own story. When she returned from her thru-hike, she decided to purchase a hostel as a way to stay connected to the trail and create space to help foster the experience for other hikers. Mary's journey has helped her authentically connect with herself to discover what really matters, and I can't wait to share her story with you. Mary, welcome to the campfire.
Oh, thank you for having me, Scott. That was very, very, very sweet intro.
Love it. Well, I want to dive right in. We were just before we hit record here, we were kind of talking, my day job is in real estate. So I'm so intrigued by this idea of buying a hostel and kind of connecting like real estate ownership with serving people along the trail. It's so cool. I guess what I really wanted to explore was when we were talking about this earlier, you shared with me that in your experience providing hospitality and assistance and shelter to thru-hikers along the trail, that you've found that a great many of them found themselves on the trail because of this thing called an inciting incident. And I wondered if we could just dive right in and talk about that phrase. What does it mean to experience an inciting incident?
Yeah. So for a lot of thru-hikers, the inciting incident looks a lot like a big life change. More often than not, it's retirement, because a lot of hikers wait until they've completed their careers to kind of take that next step and go, do the thing for themselves. But we also see a lot of younger people too. In 2022, when I thru-hiked, I actually hiked with a kid who started hiking the trail the moment he graduated from high school. And
Nice.
We get a lot of college graduates, but, we don't see a lot of people that are around my age, like mid-career, because we're usually got the kids in the house and all of that. But usually it's retirement, it's graduation. It's sometimes, unfortunately, we had a hiker this year who his friend had passed away and they had always planned to go hike together. So he decided to hike in honor and the memory of his friend. So it can be something really positive. It can be something really negative, but usually it's something like that just kind of marks the end of one way of being and opens an avenue to a new way of being.
So it's almost like a celebration of a life transition.
Yeah, I would say that.
Yeah.
Celebration, or even just a way to figure it out. A lot of people come to the trail with those kind of questions.
As you were talking about this, it seems like, retirement, there's certain things that are sort of planned transitions and some that are unplanned. And I'm curious, like, because you've had hikers come through your hostel, does planned versus unplanned seem to change the experience for people or kind of how they approach it?
That's a good question. I would say no, because it really just depends on your internal motivation. If you've been planning to hike your entire life through your 30-year career, and then you retire and you hike and you're internally really motivated to hike, you're going to have success with it. Likewise, if you come to the trail after, something that surprised you, there were a lot of nurses after COVID that hiked my year because they were so burnt out from their jobs and they just needed that kind of hard reset. But they were really motivated to take that time off for themselves. So I wouldn't say that planned versus unplanned would necessarily indicate, success or change the experience, but I can only really speak to my experience also. So
what about and again, I understand you can only speak to your experience, but like in the conversations that you've had, like people's intentions Does the intention for a hike change depending on your inciting incident?
I would say that brings to mind kind of the way that you approach a through hike. There's a big marker of success for people that are going to be successful in their through hike. Their ability to adapt to change is a really crucial piece of a successful through hike because it's not going to go the way that you think it's going to go. I remember, on my through hike, I didn't have a lot of time to prepare because it was something that I had dreamed of doing for years, but only earnestly prepared for like 6 months to a year.
Yeah.
But I trained. I ran half marathons, and I still on day 3, because I'm originally from Louisiana and wasn't used to hiking in the mountains, injured my knee and had to take 2 days off from the trail, and was just like, oh my gosh, is my hike over? But being like, okay, well, maybe I'm not going to go as fast as I thought I would. It might take a little bit more time, and being able to adapt to that helped me get past that. That brings to mind a kid that we had stay at the hostel during Northbound season, where he had a printed out, laminated piece of paper, planning out basically his first month or 2 of the trail, where he would stop to take breaks, where he would right. And he was young, but he was strong, and he was, keeping up with it, but he was having a little bit of stress, like sitting there staring at this thing, like, how am I going to make this happen? I'm behind schedule. And he asked me, because he knew that I had through hiked, he's like, what would you do? And I said, give me that. And he was like, what are you going to do with it? I was like, what do you think I'm going to do with it? I'm like, you're 19 years old. Go enjoy. Like, you have no bills. You have no kids, probably. Just go. And as far as I know, I'm pretty sure he made it.
I love it. I mean, it's funny because there's a version of myself that fits that, like having everything structured out and planned, and it's so cool. But it's funny too, because so I've got kids at home, and I will hike the Appalachian Trail at some point. I would love to do it as a through hike, just not the right season of life right now to be able to take however long it's going to take me. But yeah, I mean, maybe it's retirement, maybe it's a transition of becoming an empty nester. We'll see. But I can definitely see that.
Or you can take them with you. There have been families that have through hiked the trail before. I met several of them on the trail, and teach their own. I don't know. I could barely take care of myself sometimes, so I can't imagine taking care of a child as well out there. But they made it.
Episode 1 of Inspire Campfire was with Josh Sutton, who hiked with his wife Cassie and their 5-year-old son.
Oh, okay. I need to go back and listen to that. That's really cool. Yeah.
Nice. Epic story. But so, Mary, you had an inciting incident. Can you tell us how you found the trail?
I definitely did. Rewinding all the way back to 2020. In addition to all of the other things that were happening to us collectively with COVID, I also got divorced. My first spouse was my high school sweetheart, so that was particularly jarring. I had never been alone. I had never lived alone or really made any sort of decision that just impacted me, ever. I had always existed within the context of that relationship because we got them together so young, and I didn't know any other way. And then suddenly I was back in the driver's seat of my own life. It was a very difficult time, but even then I could see that I'd been given an opportunity to live my life as I never really had before, just totally on my own terms. It was a gift and a second lease on life for both of us. When she initiated the divorce, my ex came out to me initially as a gay man, and then later arrived at the realization that she was trans. And, we're still on good terms. We're in touch. I was texting her earlier this morning, actually. And it's been a really beautiful thing to witness both of us separately pursue our dreams and authenticity in ways we never could have when we were together.
Yeah. So, it's quite an impactful story. And I know that as you've kind of talked through this, it ended up becoming an opportunity for both of you to get more deeply, and not even more deeply, very deeply in touch with yourselves and letting go of a lot of things that kind of were holding you back from your past.
Yeah. My journey to the AT actually began about 5 years before my thru hike. I was still married, and my ex-wife and I were on a road trip. and we stopped for a day hike in the middle of the Smoky Mountains at a place called Newfound Gap. And that was where I first saw the AT, stepped foot on it. We did a day hike on it. And when I did, I was overwhelmed by this really strange understanding, not really a decision per se, but more like a knowing that the next time I stood at that trailhead, I would have walked there from Georgia. Had I backpacked a single day in my life at that point? No. I had never slept in the woods. I had never hiked anything longer than like maybe 8 miles at that point, or carried a backpack. So it made no sense to have that thought at all. And I was also really early on in my religious deconstruction at that time, but I was pretty certain I no longer believed in God or fate or what have you. So that moment really struck me. And then when I got divorced, thru-hiking was the very first idea that I had. One moment I was hearing that my marriage was over and processing that and going, oh, wow, my life is about to change. And next one I was thinking, well, at least I can go hike now, because my ex-wife had zero interest in joining me when I had brought it up in the past. So it really, the seed to that inciting incident and how it led to getting to the trail was planted years before, and like long before I could have ever, associated the end of my marriage with through hiking the trail, but it all came together later.
So it's so interesting because you guys went to this place, Newfound Gap, and you experienced this sort of knowing, this sort of feeling, and it was kind of a foreshadowing of what was to come. Is that?
Yeah, I would say that. I still don't understand it because I'm still pretty just like not believing in really anything. Well, that's not true. I take that back. I would say I'm more agnostic now. There's a something, not sure what it is, but there have been too many things like that, moment that I can't explain. But yeah, I would say it was really just a foreshadowing kind of moment. It was strange.
Hey everyone, it's Scott here. Did you know that the members of my real estate team, W Realty Group, are listening to their own voices that call to adventure by setting big goals? Some of those goals include planning trips to Bali and the Kingdom of Bhutan, buying investment homes, and running the Chicago Marathon. At W Realty Group, we support and encourage these big goals and want to help turn them into reality. We're currently looking to add new members to the team. If you know a great real estate agent in the Charlotte, North Carolina area that would benefit from being part of our team, please send a text, an email, or give me a call. And know that when you support W Realty Group, you're also supporting this podcast. Thanks for listening. I wonder if we could just stop for a moment on that, because so much of what we talk about here on this podcast, what I love is, I love the adventures, but I also really love exploring the call to adventure. And it feels like that moment at Newfound Gap, before you knew you were going to actually do this Appalachian Trail, you kind of felt this like inner call to adventure. And I'm just curious, like, was it a thought? Was it a feeling? Like, I wonder if you could describe what that was like.
I was really just aware of myself in that moment. I remember just being like overwhelmed by sensation, I guess, just standing there. It was such a bright day. It was June, in the middle of summer. It was so warm, and, there were tourists everywhere, but it all just kind of faded into the background, where I was like, I looked at the trail, going north at Newfound Gap. There's a little like bathrooms and like a little like pavilion stage thing there. And then if you turn around and you look across the parking lot and across the street, there's, the road crossing there. Yeah. So I remember just kind of like looking north and going, huh, and then looking south and going, huh, and then looking north again. And there's a little sign at that trailhead. And I don't think they've updated it. The mileage has changed since they put it up there. But it said 1,972 miles to Katahdin. And something about that moment of just going like, I could literally just start walking and I could walk to Maine, or I could turn around and walk like 150 miles or whatever it is now, south to Georgia. And I was like, that is so strange. I'll do that one day. And it was just, it wasn't, like I said, it wasn't really a decision. It was just like, this is going to happen. Don't know how, when, why, but it will.
Would you call like a part of what that was desire? Was there like a desire there, like I want, or was it something different?
I don't know. I would say, yeah, my initial instinct is to say, yeah, there's desire there.
Mhm.
But it was more, I remember being confused. Like, but I've never backpacked. But at the same time, I felt really drawn to it. So yeah, I could say that there was a desire there to do it.
So the desire, but the other thing I'm picking up on is sort of this like self-confident I can. Was that there as well?
That's a really good point. That's actually something I haven't realized. There was so kind of backing back into, the corner where we were talking about my marriage. There wasn't a lot of confidence in that union. There were, without getting into the nitty gritty detail of it, there is an element of being required to be something I was not. Mm-hmm. And little did I know my ex-wife was also required to be something she was not. So there was a lot of self-assuredness in my marriage or my life. I wouldn't have called myself a confident person then. So it's interesting that you say that, because now when I think back on it, I can pinpoint that moment as like the first little seed getting planted of like, oh, you can live your life on your terms. Yeah, no, I'd agree with that.
And at that point at Newfound Gap, that first time, the divorce wasn't that wasn't really in the picture at that point. And so like over the next couple of years, like how did Newfound Gap play in your mind over the course of like what kind of transpired over the next couple of years? Like, was it just like thoughts that popped up, or did it intensify in any way?
Yeah. I mean, I talked to my ex about like, hey, this is something that I really feel like would be nice to do. Do you want to do it with me? And she wasn't as, I think, a very practical person. She was like, with what money? We have a mortgage. This, and very good reasons, but it was the way that it manifested in our marriage after that was me going, well, I want to do this thing, but then also being kind of held back by it. And I think that kind of push and pull between me wanting to go on the trail and her going, oh, no, really reflected the kind of internal push and pull that was happening for her that I didn't know about, between what she knew she was, how she identified, and what she was trying really, really hard to be, and what I knew about myself and what I wanted for my life, and how I was trying really, really hard to like be a good partner and, do things together, when it was starting to become really clear that what we both needed was to separate and go down our own paths.
Yeah. So if we were to fast forward, like, do you remember when your decision came into play? Like, okay, I'm doing this now. Like I'm going to go to the trail and I'm going to hike.
Yeah.
I'm going to make this happen. This dream that I had, this knowing that I had in 2020, like it's happening.
Yeah, no, I literally, the moment she asked me for the divorce, she came out and said, hey, we can't do this anymore. And I knew she was right. There was mourning there was hurt because your marriage is over and it sucks. But there was also like, okay, finally, we have arrived at this moment that both of us have known was coming for a long time. And my very next thought was, well, I can do the trail. After that, so the divorce was initiated in 2020. It was finalized in 2021. And shortly after that, throughout that, I was renovating the house that we used to share. We had bought this project house. She didn't want anything to do with it. So I got the house in the divorce with all of its, exposed studs and like dangling wires and things to renovate. And I, exercised being alone for the first time in my life by renovating that house on my own, figuring it out as I went along. Yeah. So I finished renovating it. And then, if you're a realtor, what happened in 2021? This big housing bubble happened. And I was like, I had just finished, renovating the house. And I've been thinking like, well, the AT, I want to go. and I was kind of at that crossroads, and then the bubble happened, and I was like, let's put the house on the market.
Yeah.
And I immediately within like a couple hours got a over asking, sight unseen offer, and was like, there it is. Like that was the fastest I've ever sold a house before. And I sold my house. I sold anything that wouldn't fit into the smallest storage unit I could find, and then I hopped on the trail and I went. Yeah, it was kind of the driving force behind all of those decisions, because I knew that to do that, I really wanted to cut my ties. I didn't want to have a house and rent it out and all of that. I was like, no, if I'm going to start over, I'm going to start over, and I'm going to do it on hard mode. So yeah, and that also kind of played into my success as a thru-hiker, because there were moments, later on the trail that the trail was very, very difficult, like physically and mentally really demanding. And eventually I was like, well, no matter what you do, if you quit now, if you finish the trail, you're going to have to start your life over again. And isn't, kind of suffering out here better than being at home and like kind of doing all that? Like, you want to start your life over now, or you want to kind of push it a little bit? So I decided to stay out in the woods, and it was a good decision.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot in what you just talked about. I'm thinking about the house, and you talked about the dangling wires and the renovations, and like no stranger to that, but this is the first time where you're like sort of on your own, doing this on your own. And we just talked about like being at Newfound Gap, having this sort of like, I can feeling. Mm-hmm. And with the house, like that was another I can, and you took it and you went with it.
Yeah. I got really, really good at drywall, which has helped us with the hostel, because this has also been a project since we got it.
And that's cool. And I'm excited to get to that, but I didn't realize that you had already renovated a house. And so like, mm-hmm. It's just this sort of natural progression into this next step of buying a hostel. And we're going to get to that. I'd love to just take a minute to just talk about your experience on the AT itself, and sort of like, you did have this inciting incident, and how the trail maybe helped you sort of like process what happened.
So by the time I arrived, at Springer Mountain, Georgia, to start the trail, I had been on, a handful of backpacking trips. I had gotten my gear, I had tested it, but the longest trip I'd ever been on was 3 days, max, versus the 6 months that I'm about to spend living in the woods. Mm-hmm. And I was terrified. I was like literally shaking in my boots, my figurative boots. I wore trail runners, not boots, but I was shaking in my trail runners. and I was so perplexed by that, because I was like, I renovated the house. I sold everything. I quit my job. I've done all of this. I survived my divorce, and I'm so scared of this thing that I've literally been dreaming about doing for years. And I was like, well, how did I do all of those other things? And there's, that kind of realization as I went, that I didn't go from, my divorce being asked for to immediately being over it. There were all those like little steps between, there's, the first year when I talk to people, because I've had, friends, fortunately / unfortunately, get divorced. And I've always told them the first year is really hard, because the first year is your first Christmas without them, your first, all of your holidays, all of your anniversaries, all of your special moments, your birthday, their birthday. And it's the first time that you have to deal with all of that. And with every significant date in that, there's that little moment of, but it gets better as you go along. So I was like, how do I approach the AT in this way? And kind of going back to your earlier question about what can you do to really like change the outcome of your thru-hike, I guess. If you look at a thru-hike as, I'm about to go live in the woods for 6 months, it's going to be overwhelming, because it is overwhelming. But if you look at it in terms of, okay, I'm in town now. How many more days until my next resupply? About 3 days. So I need 3 days of food. Where am I going today? Where's my next water source? Where am I going to camp tonight? And if you, put it into these little bite-sized chunks as you go, that makes it really approachable and achievable.
Yeah. I mean, it's a day at a time, right? You pack up
Mhm.
you get up, you pack up your gear, you walk.
Yeah. You eat some really terrible, disgusting for you food. Like, it's so weird to be in the absolute best shape of your life and eating the worst possible diet. But that is it.
Calories. Just
Yeah, it's just
give me
calories at
calories.
that point.
I'm super curious to hear. I can't remember about how many miles it is from the start in Georgia to Newfound Gap, but I'm curious to hear like what was it like that it was about 100 something.
A little over 100. I think it's about 150. The
Okay.
mileage changes a little bit every year. So, yeah.
So I want to know what it was like to, you had this sort of experience in 2020 where you came there and you just had this feeling like I want to do this. I can do this. I'm going to do this. And then to get there, like you had to walk 150 miles just to get there. And I'm just curious what it was like to arrive at Newfound Gap.
Actually, no, now that I think about it, it's over 200 because 150 miles is like a different spot. But yeah, so to get there didn't look anything like I had imagined it at all because that's the one guarantee about life and
Yeah.
also the Appalachian Trail is nothing is going to go according to plan. Nothing. The trail laughs at your plans. So 3 days into my thru hike, I hobbled into Neal's Gap in Georgia. I was maybe 30 miles in and my knee couldn't bear weight. I had been training so hard and dreaming for so long, and I thought my hike was over because I underestimated Georgia and I did just too many miles for how early I was into a new thru hike. And I was like, okay, I need to recover and get a little bit better and see how my knee does. So after that, I did like spurts. I would go like out for a day where I was doing like 6 miles and then camp and then get back in town if I could and rest for a full day and like slowly going in spurts. And by the time I made it to Newfound Gap, my knee injury was pretty much recovered. But it took me a long time, like longer than it should have. I think I was in Georgia for more than 10 days, like 12 days. And it's like 75 miles. Just not the mileage there is just not, I cringe thinking back on it, but that's the mileage I should have been doing, or I wouldn't have had to have slowed down that much if I had been doing the mileage I should have been doing. And then, after I got injured, when I was doing those spurts, Newfound Gap became really important to me because at that point I was like, I genuinely don't know if I'm going to complete this thru hike, but I'll be damned if I'm not going to make it at least to Newfound Gap, at least to this spot. And I just kind of doggedly tried to get there. And that was my goal at that point. I didn't even care about making it to Maine or Katahdin. I wanted to, but I was like, I have to get to at least this spot. And if my knee is still bad or whatever, then I can go home. I give myself permission to do that. But ultimately I did make it, but it became kind of like a centering device, I guess, again, while I was on my thru hike.
Yeah. So it sounds like the first 200 something miles to Newfound Gap was very physically demanding, like a lot of physical suffering. Yeah. What was it like to arrive there for you?
It was special, of course. I remember it was misting and raining and just kind of like, no, it was misting and raining when I came back. So when I was on the trail, I was seeing someone who had this long distance relationship, and he actually drove out to pick me up when I made it to Newfound Gap to like celebrate and be together and all that. So I went there and I had to wait like 2 or 3 hours to, for him to get there and pick me up. But it was misting and it was cold and it was raining. And I just kind of walked up to the sign that I had seen, 5 years before and just like put my hand on it and went, okay, I made it. And then I scurried into the bathroom and loitered inside the bathroom for 3 hours because it was so cold. So it was really special. And then, when he dropped me back off after the weekend was over, I walked up there again and went, okay, well, my knee is better. I've made it here. I know I've gotten this far. And then there was just kind of like a curiosity of like, okay, well, where's the next blaze? Because the trail is marked by these white blazes. Like, what's beyond the next one, or the next one, and the next one? And then, I just kind of was led by that curiosity for the next 2,000 miles.
When you were there the first time, there was this knowing, this desire, this I can, like, were you reconnecting with that at all? Like, did that, like, how did those feelings that you had the first time, like, sort of, or did they come back?
I would say yes and no. I had that same feeling of like, okay, I'm back here, and there's still something that the trail has yet to teach me. So I'm going to keep going. But it was also curbed by this kind of knowledge about, I got hurt. Like, I hurt my knee, and I didn't know if I was going to make it. So it was more of a like, all right, let's go get this, but let's do it with this humility and respect for the trail and what it was. Not like, I'm going to go get this, it's going to be super easy, but leaning more into the desire to do it. Like, okay, at that point, I really wanted to make it all the way. And I was like, okay, let's go. And I'll take it one day at a time. And hopefully eventually I'll get there. But, between here and there, it's still going to be a great time and a great experience. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think at this point, I need to just let listeners know. People always ask me, like, how do you find your guests? And you and I met through Carly Ray, who wrote Trail Name Tales. And you are the last story in her book. Mm-hmm. And I think your trail name story is very aligned with what we're talking about right now. But could you share your trail name with us and why you chose it?
Yeah, so I named myself, which is kind of a no-no in the thru-hiking world. You're like, oh, really? You named yourself? You think you're special? Because normally you receive a trail name from another hiker. And I chose my own trail name, and I chose it for, a couple reasons. One, I'm a tall lady, and the trail name Legs was tossed around like often. And I was like, this is not happening. I'm like, this is no. But there was also a sense of wanting to take ownership of that as well, like deciding who I was going to be, deciding what my name was going to be, and who, if I could emulate that. And there is also the element of, I changed my name when I got married the first time, even though I didn't particularly want to. And about 2 weeks before I started the trail, I got my, I think my passport was the last thing to get, like, my maiden name restored to it, and it came back to me. So there was very much a sense of just like, nobody's going to tell me what my name is. Like, I will be the decision maker in this. And I named myself Newfound after the gap and the place where it all began. So I had that name when I started the trail. And every time I introduce myself to somebody, which happens a lot on the AT is a very social trail. It is not the thru-hike you want to do if you want to be alone with your thoughts, because that ain't going to happen, especially if you're going northbound in like end of March. And every time I introduced myself, I said, my name is Newfound. There was that question of like, well, why? And I would tell them that whole story about, going to the gap and how much it meant to me and how I wanted to at least get there. And then after that, I would see what happened. So I was kind of being forced to reiterate that dream and that goal and that moment for myself, to remind myself why I was there and how lucky I was that I was there. Even though I had arrived at that moment and, come to the trail, I could have never guessed that my path to the trail would have been through that much pain and the divorce and all of that. But it was, and it was still good. I would say not despite that, but because of that in a lot of ways.
So yeah, I appreciate that. And I'm really curious. You shared that you kind of went through this like religious deconstruction. You called yourself agnostic. Like I'm curious that the break in the trail, it's called Newfound Gap. And I'm just curious, like, I mean, you could have gotten inspired at any location, and I don't know what the different locations are. I know Katahdin, like maybe you were there, but like if you were standing at Katahdin, like, and that was the place that inspired you, something tells me you wouldn't have named yourself Katahdin, right?
Right. Yeah. That's a little on the nose.
But you're at this place called Newfound. And I just wonder if you ever like stop to think about like the significance of the words and how, because I mean, your whole story is about like finding yourself, like your
Oh
new
yeah.
like, so I'm just curious if you spend much time like reflecting on like the significance of coming upon this sign that says Newfound Gap.
Yeah, no, it definitely occurred to me. I got an English degree, so doing the whole like big metaphor thing, like that immediately occurred to me the moment I was like thinking about, should I give myself a trail name? What should my trail name be? Because I don't want to be named Legs, you know? And I landed on Newfound, because that moment I thought about it. I was like, well, where did it all begin? And then it was like the whole English major, like epiphany of like,
Yeah.
it has multiple meanings. Like, this is great. This works out so well. And then, eventually my friends on the trail called me Newfie because Newfound is like a really, it's just it's a mouthful of a trail name.
Yeah.
I've heard longer, but for some reason there was always like, I would introduce myself and there would be like you're what? What's your name?
There's depth to it, right? I mean, I remember I did a great episode with Carly Ray. I mean, so many trail names are just very lighthearted, very like surface level, like, pat each other on the back. But your trail name is deep and it has a lot of meaning to it.
Yeah. Yeah. And, it helped when I introduced myself on the AT because I would always be like Newfound Gap. But then when I was section hiking the PCT this summer, I did like the first 550 miles of it, introducing myself because I kept my trail name. I was like, this is my trail name for my trail community thing. Every thru-hike I'm on, this is my name. But I didn't have that context of like, oh, Newfound Gap. So I'd have to like really explain it.
So cool. So, all right. I want to get to the hostel, but could you kind of give us a quick synopsis of the next 1900 miles?
Oh God. So the Smokies tried to kill me, but it was beautiful and I would do it again. It froze. Our shoes would freeze so solid that every shelter in the Smokies has a fire grate, like with like a little stone chimney. It's like really cool. But every morning somebody would build a fire so that we could all stand by it and like thaw our shoes out, not to make them dry. That was never going to happen. My shoes were never dry on the AT. No one's was, but just to thaw it enough to shove our feet into it so that we could go. So that was the Smokies. And it was beautiful. It was brutal. It was easy in some sections. It was extremely difficult in other sections. I really loved Vermont because Vermont kind of hit that sweet spot between the heat of the summer that we experienced in the mid-Atlantic from like Pennsylvania through New York, New Jersey, where it was just hot and humid and kind of miserable. Vermont, it started to cool off and we started to get these really beautiful climbs in again into these evergreen forests. And it kind of prepared you as you went along. I guess that would be the synopsis of it, is that especially if you're going northbound, the Appalachian Trail has a really great way of preparing you for itself. If you're about to start having these really massive climbs again, the few hundred miles leading up to like the Whites in New Hampshire, which is like the most difficult part of the trail, you're going to get, some climbs to, prepare you. But before that, you had long stretches where the terrain was kind of flat. So you were able to kind of like get your endurance up and become faster. So it really had a way of preparing you as you went along, mentally and physically. Yeah, that would probably be the synopsis. New Hampshire is mean, but I do it again. And just expect the unexpected whenever you do your thru hike.
What was finishing like for you?
Katahdin was really special. The day before I went up Katahdin, I did my first 30-mile day where I hiked 30 miles in one go. And I had never wanted to like push myself in that way. It wasn't important to me to like achieve like hiking greatness. There were so many challenges along the trail to do like 40 miles and this and cross, the 4-state challenge, crossing 4 state lines in one go in one 24-hour period. But I did that because behind me, a bunch of people were contracting COVID. And ahead of me, there was some really bad weather coming. So I wanted to make it to Katahdin. So the night before I went up Katahdin, I had that moment of like, okay, I'm really going to challenge myself now and see if I can do this, because I want to do this for me. And I faced, the fear of that, but I also had a big fear of night hiking. I was so scared and hiked for like 3 hours in just the darkest darkness because you're in the middle of nowhere, Maine.
Were you alone for that hike?
Yeah, that day, that night I was, but so there was kind of leading up to it. There was that like kind of final reckoning of, you've done everything you came out here to do. There's just a couple more things that you could see if you got what it takes, if you want to prove it to yourself, not to prove anything to anyone outside of me, nothing external, just like, this is what's needed to like finish your hike within a reasonable time frame and not catch COVID. So go do it. And I did. And then going up Katahdin was really special. Because of that 30-mile day, I caught up to some people that I hadn't seen for a long time. As I was going up the side of Katahdin, people were coming down that I hadn't seen since New Jersey. There was one particular friend that was coming down that I hadn't seen since day 2 in Georgia.
Wow.
And we walked up, I walked up to him and I was just like, how is this happening? And I know so many other people that have similar stories where they're like, we all just converged right there at the end. You kind of had this full circle moment of like seeing your friends or people that you started, the trail with, being able to complete it together as well. So it was really special. And then making it to the top of Katahdin, I was emotional, but I didn't cry or anything. There was just kind of like just a steadiness of like, I did it, I did make it here. And now I get to take that, all the lessons and everything that I learned, everything I became and unbecame while I was on the trail, I get to take that with me. So it was special, but it wasn't in a like, oh my God, like sobbing and everything. Not that reaction is any better or worse than what mine was, but it just felt very true to me in the journey. I started off terrified and ended with just like collected. I did it,
Yeah. I mean, it started years earlier with, I think I can, and now it's done.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so funny, we talked about this a little bit before we hit record, but like when you were finished, you were not ready to be finished, but you kind of were.
Oh yeah. New Hampshire did terrible things to my mind and to my body. It was really, really difficult hiking. So there was a big part of me that was ready to be done with it and just to like be able to rest and, just to call it a day. Yeah. But, the AT is it's a really rare place where you can look at all the people around you, all the thru-hikers around you, and it doesn't matter where you came from. There's a lot of international thru-hikers. Where you came from, what brought you to the trail, how old you are, what your beliefs and opinions are, what your religious beliefs are, your political opinions. You all have one really big, crucial thing in common. You all decided to walk away from your old life, whatever it was, in whatever capacity. If you sold everything you owned, or if you had somebody like move into your house, you still walked away from what you knew before and had so much curiosity about the possibility of this journey that you literally walked into the unknown. Yeah. And I missed that so much. Like within days of getting off the trail, I mean, it was hard to lose that community. Like the AT is it's an extremely social trail. Yeah. And it's wonderful. It challenged my belief that I was an introvert. I learned that I'm really kind of not, because I miss them every day.
Well, and that takes us into where you are today, because you found a way to stay connected to that community.
Yes, it did. So the hostel, my current husband, because I've since gotten remarried, and I met on the trail. He had hiked the AT in 2021. I was hiking in 2022, the same year that he was about to go off and do the PCT. And he came out and did something called Trail Magic, where he set up shop and just like handed out snacks and hot chocolate he had. And It was in the middle of a blizzard. I walked out of the woods into a parking lot. He handed me hot chocolate, and we just had a really great conversation. Fast forward to the end of both of our thru hikes. We didn't really talk. I think there was like, I ended up in Delaware Water Gap in Pennsylvania, and he like sent me a restaurant recommendation because he saw I was there for my Instagram stories. But we weren't really in communication until we both separately moved to Asheville. And while I was there, you know, kind of navigating living alone again and all of that, and missing my community, I set up a Google Meet and for people that I had hiked with, and we met like once a month usually. And since I knew that he had thru hiked and could really speak to post-trail depression and like reintegrating yourself into society, I invited him to join in on those calls and kind of help people. So we had like kind of a relationship there. And then later he was like, hey, you want to go get a beer, you know, for a hike? And 6 months later, we were dating and had just moved in together when we saw the hostel that I'm currently sitting in hit the market. And this house had been a hostel previously. The previous owner, he unfortunately passed away in spring of 2023. And neither of us had stayed in this hostel on our thru hikes, but we knew what it was. And we saw it hit the market, instantly knew what it was, and then had the brilliant idea to go in on a mortgage and a business and like navigating and living together with our partner of 6 entire months.
Love it.
So we did that. And the only reason we got the house was because we told our realtor, hey, let, you know, the executors of the estate, it was the previous owner's mother, let her know that our intention is to keep running it as a hostel. And we know for a fact that there were cash offers that beat ours that were on the table, and she still chose ours. So there is a continuation of that kind of legacy hostel to keep it in the community. And then it was also just like, you know, learning each other and, you know, eloping in the middle of it casually, just because why not? And staying connected to the community. And that has been really, really special. You can probably see, I have like postcards from hikers who stayed with us this past spring that they completed the trail, and they'll send postcards to us. And it's really special to see people at the beginning of their journey, because we're about 100 miles in if you're going northbound, and see that these really green hiker babies that walked in with their feet hurting and, you know, carrying like 20 extra pounds of gear that they didn't need, that we were able to like talk with them. Like, my husband is amazing with pack shakedowns. He can just like look at you and be like, you don't need that. And he's right every single time. So being able to like kind of be there for the hikers as they come through, and also just like keep this place in the community has been really special.
It's pretty awesome to have people like you guys. I mean, it's still 100 miles in, but to have people like you guys, like early on in the trail, that can provide some guidance and some insight and kind of help prep you for what's coming. Having been on the trail and gone through it personally yourself, like any insights on any particular like transformations that you've seen, or even kind of patterns or things that you've seen with hikers that are coming through, and like maybe how you've sort of connected back to your own experience on the trail?
I mean, there's a lot of people that share the same inciting incident that I did, the whole divorce and learning how to be alone. There's a lot of that on trail, just in general, not necessarily divorce, but that whole like, I have decided that I need to learn how to do life on my own and listen to my intuition. And I am here to learn how to do that. There's no better way to get in tune with your own body than taking it for a really long walk every single day with nothing to accompany you other than like your thoughts, or if you're listening to music that's just kind of in the background. But yeah, I would say that by the time they make it here, they are, a good portion of them are going to be successful. they are gonna, be figuring out what gear doesn't work for them at this point. There's a lot of foot problems that walk into Franklin because 100 miles in, if your shoes are not the right size for you, you are going to know. And then they just kind of keep going. But by the time they've made it here, they have already been humbled. Georgia is a state that a lot of people, including myself, really underestimate when they start through hiking the Appalachian Trail, because you're like, it's Georgia, how hard can it be? But they don't believe in switchbacks in Georgia. So when you go up the side of a mountain, you go straight up that thing and then straight down. And it's really hard on your knees, and it's hard on morale. So by the time you've made it here, you've kind of learned that lesson of like, don't underestimate it.
It's good to know. Something kind of struck me as you were talking. It's a scary thought to go do something like the Appalachian Trail by yourself, 2,000 plus miles. But, because it feels like I'm going to be all alone, like it's going to be. But there's people like you and your husband that are along the way with like tons of experience having been through this and trail magic. Like there are people along the way that are going to be able to help you.
Yeah, no, the Appalachian Trail, it's a community effort. And I mean that not only, referencing the community that you're in as you're hiking, but it is the people that are in town as well. The shuttle drivers, the, hostel owners, the people that do trail magic. There's a huge just web of support all the way north to Katahdin, all the way south to Springer, of just people who really want to see you succeed. And, often they're people who have done the same thing. It's definitely a different trail than what it used to be. It used to not be as heavily foot trafficked, and there's a lot of people that are like, the good old days. But I think that the community of the Appalachian Trail, both the people that are on the trail and the people that are off trail running that, network of support is really special.
Yeah. What's the name of your hostel and how do people find you?
So the name of the hostel is the Grove Hostel. It used to be Gooder Grove Hostel. That was the family name of the gentleman that passed away. His name was Zinn, was his trail name, Gooder. So we kept the same name, but, we dropped the family name to just kind of, signify that it's changed hands.
Yeah.
And you can find us at thegrovehostel.com. You can also find me at maryleavines.com. I'm also on Instagram under the same, URL, username, but I'm kind of taking a little social media break right now. So my website and my newsletter is the best way to find me.
Yeah. And you're currently working on a memoir.
I am. Yeah. It's the first draft is done and I'm editing it now. So I'm really excited to see where it goes next. But it's a long road to publication, which, you probably know because you kind of start to research that as you're writing.
Yeah.
But excited for it.
I love it. Mary, for people, as we kind of wrap up here and kind of circle back to this whole idea of an inciting incident, a lot of times, like maybe somebody experiences an inciting incident, but they don't necessarily see how that's the thing that ends up shaping the rest of their journey, which yours most certainly did. I'm just curious if you have any thoughts or advice for people that maybe have had sort of this inciting incident, but can't yet see what's coming for them.
Yeah. Give life room to surprise you. Allow yourself to be surprised. There was a time, right after my divorce that I genuinely did not think I would survive it. There was just no possible way for me to wrap my brain around, like, how do I go on past this? This has been, we had started dating, we were 16. I was like, the better part of a decade and the most formative years of my young adult life, just suddenly that ends. Like, how do I process that and move on from that? And, I'm trying to write a book, but I literally could not, have planned like, oh, this happened. And then that ended with me through hiking, meeting my husband on the trail and owning a hostel. I could not have written that into existence. It's the most surprising thing that could have happened after all of that. For me, it just, allowing life to surprise you and like giving it the space to surprise you is really just the best thing that I did.
Let life surprise you. I love this. So Mary, like when you look at your story and your journey, I mean, it has all the key elements of a great story. You've got this inciting incident, then you go off on this epic adventure and you struggle and you beat the odds, and then you come back and now you're like sharing your story and your wisdom with other people through the hospitality and the hostel that you purchased. And it's just so cool. Like at some point, Hollywood is going to pick up on your story. And they're going to want to make a movie about you. Oh yeah.
I don't know.
Maybe they'll take the memoir and maybe that'll turn into the movie. But what I want to know is when they make a movie about you, who's going to be the Hollywood actress that's going to play you in your movie? Yeah.
And to be clear to anyone listening, like we discussed this before we went on the air, and I'm still trying to think because I'm movie illiterate. I don't know actor names. I don't know any of these people. The only thing that I could think of, because you allowed me the time to think on it mentally, I was a teenager when all of the like YA books were being adapted into movies. So like the Twilight, the Hunger Games, all of that. I watched all of those movies, and I loved Jennifer Lawrence.
Yeah.
I loved how just unbothered she was. You would see an interview and she would just show up and be like, I took my heels off 2 hours ago. My dress is itchy. I'm only here because they told me there was pizza. Where's the pizza? And I love how unbothered she is. And I just I identify with that really strongly. And I aspire to that level of irreverence, because I don't know or care about like the Hollywood thing. But yeah, whether we look alike, I don't know, but I like her.
That's a great choice. What's your movie going to be called?
Oh, I mean, I would just name it after me. That's the working title for my memoir, is just Newfound. If there's a subtitle, I don't know yet, but that's what I named it. So
Newfound, starring Jennifer Lawrence. I'm all in. I love it. I think it's great. Well, Mary, thank you so much for the time that you spent with us today. I really, really appreciate it. This has been super enlightening. And for those listening, I hope you've been inspired today as much as I have. Hope Mary's story has encouraged you to listen to the voice inside that calls you to adventure, because we want to hear your story next. If you have a story to tell or just need a nudge to create one, please send me an email. We'd also appreciate it if you'd help us spread the word by leaving a review and sharing or tagging Inspire Campfire in your social media. And until next time, I want to encourage you to get outside. Thanks for listening. Mary Leavines, thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me, Scott. It was a great conversation.